You wake up in chains. Your breath uneven, the cold air scraping against your throat, the ground beneath you wet, reeking of iron, blood, and fear. Outside, footsteps echo, and whispers grow louder, because today you will not be beheaded, not hanged. You will be skinned, alive. This is not a nightmare. This was real. A punishment so ancient, so horrific, that even the executioners who carried it out sometimes wept. It wasn't about justice, it was about control. The art of fear turned into a ritual of pain. Imagine this, a kingdom waking up to the sound of drums. A public square filled with hundreds of people, silent, waiting. At the center, a prisoner, stripped, trembling, eyes drowning in terror. The ruler watches from his throne, because today, punishment itself will speak louder than any law. The executioner steps forward, not with a sword, not with an axe, but with a small knife, a blade so sharp it could split a single hair. And with that knife begins the most horrifying ritual in human history. The first cut is almost gentle, a small line across the shoulder. The knife slides beneath the skin, lifting it slowly, and then the tearing begins. The victim screams, not from death, but from a pain that refuses to end. The body doesn't die immediately. The skin, our shield, our armor, is what keeps us alive. And when it's taken away, inch by inch, the body fights desperately to survive. Some victims lived for hours, some for days. Every heartbeat was agony, every breath, fire, every sound, a reminder that death was still far away. And the crowd watched, frozen between fascination and horror, as the knife kept moving. But why? Why would any human being invent something so monstrous? The answer is simple and terrifying, because in those dark centuries, pain meant power. Fear ruled kingdoms, and agony was the language of obedience. In ancient Assyria, rebels were flayed alive, their skins nailed to city walls as warnings. The walls of Nineveh once glistened, not with gold, but with the flesh of the defeated. It wasn't punishment, it was a message. Defy us and lose not just your life, but your skin. In Persia, under the rule of cruel kings, corrupt judges we skinned alive. Their hides were stretched over the very chairs that their successors sat on, so that every judgment, every sentence, was made in the shadow of death itself. In China, during the Ming Dynasty, Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang turned this horror into theater. He ordered traitors to be flayed in the public square. Their skin hung like banners in the wind, and the people were forced to watch, to learn what happens to those who disobey the throne. In Europe, during the Middle Ages, flaying was used as divine punishment. Traitors, witches, heretics, all met the same fate. They were tied to pole, their flesh peeled away, as priests prayed, pretending it was God's will. But this was no act of God. This was the work of men, even the executioners. Men hardened by death. Sometimes looked away, because the human scream, when skin is torn from flesh, is something that never leaves your ears. They say the smell of burning oil used to keep the victim alive longer, haunted them for life. And yet, people came to watch. They brought their children. They called it justice. They believed it was righteous, holy, necessary. But what truly lived that day was not faith. It was cruelty. Pure, deliberate, human cruelty. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. But the memory of this punishment refused to die. Artists painted it, historians recorded it, and rulers whispered of it. Because fear worked. One public flaying could silence 1,000 rebellions. Some executioners even took pride in their skill. They learned where to cut, how deep to go, how to stop just before death arrived. It wasn't just torture, it was a performance. They called themselves artists. Their canvas was the human body, and the victims. Most weren't criminals. Many were philosophers, scholars, priests, even women. People whose only crime was speaking truth to power. Their pain was meant to silence everyone else. Can you imagine the silence of the dungeon? The sound of the knife scraping bone? The echo of a whisper? Please, just kill me. But death was mercy, and mercy was forbidden. Even today, traces remain. Ancient writings, temple carvings, records of rulers who bragged about their punishments. Historians call it one of humanity's darkest inventions, because this was not about execution. It was about breaking the soul. Unlike the guillotine, which ended life instantly, flaying was designed to make you feel every moment, to make you suffer, to make the world watch, to turn pain into a warning. But here's the most tragic truth. We remember the pain, but we've forgotten the people. Their names were erased, their screams lost to time. All that remains are the whispers of walls where their skin once hung. They say history is written by the victors, but those walls tell another story, a story of rulers who mistook fear for loyalty and cruelty for power. The victims were displayed as trophies, their skin preserved, tanned like leather, sometimes even worn by those who ordered their death. It was psychological warfare, perfected, because when people saw those walls, when they saw what happened to rebels, they learned to stay silent. In some cultures, this punishment was reserved for the worst crimes. In others, it was used for entertainment, for sport. The line between justice and sadism had disappeared completely. And the worst part? This wasn't some isolated practice. It happened across continents, across centuries, in empires that called themselves civilized. From Asia to Europe, from Africa to the Middle East, humanity found the same solution to the same problem: how to make people obey. The medical knowledge required was disturbing. Executioners studied anatomy, learned nerve pathways, discovered how to maximize pain while delaying death. They knew which cuts would cause the most suffering, which organs to avoid, to keep the victim conscious. This was science, twisted into torture. Some victims begged for poison, for a quick blade to the heart, but their pleas fell on deaf ears, because a quick death defeated the purpose. The purpose was the suffering. The purpose was the spectacle. Imagine being that person, knowing what's coming for hours, days even, hearing the knife being sharpened, hearing the crowd gathering outside, knowing that your pain will be their lesson. And when it finally began, when that first cut was made, the brain's natural response was to shut down, to go into shock, but they wouldn't let you. Cold water, smelling salts, even wine. Anything to keep you awake, to keep you feeling. The psychological torture was just as brutal. Prisoners were shown the tools beforehand, told exactly what would happen, step by step. The anticipation became its own form of hell. Some historical accounts mention victims who went insane. Before the punishment even began, their minds breaking under the weight of what was coming. And still, the punishment continued. Because by then, it wasn't about the individual anymore. It was about the message. So, when we look back at history, at the great civilizations, the mighty empires, we must remember that beneath every grand palace, every beautiful monument, were dungeons, dark places, where humanity's worst instincts were given permission to flourish. The practice eventually faded, not because humanity became more merciful, but because rulers discovered more efficient ways to control, ways that didn't require quite so much blood. But the scars remain, in our collective memory, in our darkest stories, in the part of us that still remembers what humans are capable of when cruelty is given a crown. And though centuries have passed, that silence still speaks. It whispers to us that the greatest cruelty ever invented was not the knife, not the pain, not even the death. It was the human heart that conceived it, justified it, and carried it out, without mercy, without hesitation, without regret. This is our history, dark, brutal, unforgiving, and we must remember it, not to celebrate it, but to ensure that such darkness never rises again.